All right, let's dive right in. Today we're tackling a topic that's kind of infamous. A place shrouded in mystery, disappearances, all that spooky stuff. The Bermuda Triangle. And oh man, you guys sent in a ton of stuff. Articles, historical accounts, even a YouTube video breaking down some famous cases. So let's see if we can navigate through all the hype, uncover what's really going on in this notorious triangle.
Well, it's fascinating. Unlike those old sea monster stories, this Bermuda Triangle thing, it's a surprisingly new myth. It didn't really grab everyone's attention until like the mid 20th century.
You're right. It seems to all start with that article from 1950, right? The one that pointed out all the strange disappearances.
Yeah.
But it didn't really offer any explanations, just left everybody hanging with this big question mark, like, what happened?
Exactly. And then just a couple years later, another article actually drew the triangle as we know it, connecting Florida, Puerto Rico, and Bermuda. And here's the thing. The author, they kind of just picked those points seemingly at random. There was no scientific reasoning behind it.
So right from the start, we're dealing with a pretty loose definition. But then things get really sensationalized in 1964 when Argosy magazine, the one with all those adventure stories, ran that huge feature, Lost in the Bermuda Triangle. Talk about a catchy title.
Oh yeah, that Argosy article. Definitely entertaining, but they played pretty fast and loose with the facts. They embellished stories, even added some details that were totally made up, and it just tapped into this, public fascination with the unexplained. Turned the Bermuda Triangle into this paranormal hotspot.
Speaking of unexplained, our sources even mentioned Christopher Columbus. Apparently, he encountered some strange things in the triangle. Way back on his first voyage across the Atlantic, a fireball in the sky, his compass acting weird, and then he sees this mysterious light. Sounds like he sailed straight into a sci-fi movie, right?
Well, not quite. While those events are often used as, proof of the triangle's strangeness, they all have pretty straightforward explanations. Like the fireball was probably just a meteor. Those would have been visible in September, the month Columbus was sailing, and the compass acting up. That was likely due to magnetic declination.
Okay, yeah, magnetic declination. I've heard of it, but could you break that down a bit,
Yeah.
for our listeners?
Absolutely. Basically, it's the difference between true north and magnetic north. The Earth's magnetic field, it's not perfectly aligned with its axis of rotation, so compasses which point to magnetic north can be slightly off, especially over long distances. This was a big problem for early navigators like Columbus. They were crossing these vast, uncharted oceans.
So his compass wasn't actually broken. It was just, doing the best it could with the information it had. But what about that mysterious light he saw? That one seems a little harder to explain, doesn't it?
That's true. The light sighting was within the area we now call the Bermuda Triangle. But, and here's the fascinating part, Columbus, he saw that light and he thought, land. He thought it was a torch or a bonfire on the shore. And guess what? He was right. Hours later, he made landfall and sighted the American continent. So that mysterious light was actually a beacon, you could say, guiding him towards his historic discovery.
Wow, that's actually a really cool twist on that story.
Yeah.
A good reminder that sometimes the simplest explanation is the right one. But then you have cases like Flight 19, probably the most famous disappearance linked to the Bermuda Triangle. 5 Navy planes just vanishing without a trace during a routine training exercise. It's enough to give anyone goosebumps.
Yeah, Flight 19 is the case that really cemented the Bermuda Triangle myth. 5 planes, and the rescue planes sent to find them just disappearing. It's the perfect fuel for speculation and conspiracy theories.
Our sources suggest that the explanation might be less about, supernatural forces and more about human error in some unfortunate circumstances.
That's what the evidence points to. The flight leader, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, he seems to have gotten disoriented, convinced that his compasses were malfunctioning, even though there's no sign of any equipment failure.
Our research shows that Taylor had a lot of experience flying over the Florida Keys. Is it possible he mistook the Bahamas, where Flight 19 was, for his usual training area?
It's definitely a plausible theory. And sadly, it seems like Taylor's distrust of his compasses. It led him to fly further out to sea, away from safety, instead of towards it.
And then there's the weather, which was getting worse throughout the flight. We have transcripts of the radio chatter between the planes, and you could really hear the desperation in their voices as they realize they're lost and running out of fuel. The last transmissions indicate they were preparing to ditch in those rough seas.
And to add to the tragedy, we have the disappearance of the rescue plane, a Martin Mariner flying boat that was sent to search for Flight 19. There were witnesses who reported seeing a plane explode in midair around that time. Now, that particular mariner had a history of mechanical problems, so an accident is definitely a possibility.
So instead of some supernatural force pulling planes from the sky, we have human error, equipment failure, and just plain bad luck, all coming together in a terrible tragedy. It's a reminder that the ocean can be a very unforgiving environment.
Absolutely. And as we dig deeper into your sources, you'll find this pattern of possible explanations comes up again and again. The real question is why the Bermuda Triangle myth persists, despite the lack of evidence for anything paranormal.
Well, there's that saying, right? Never let the facts get in the way of a good story. But before we get too comfortable with these rational explanations, there are a couple of cases that, even after all our research, still remain pretty mysterious. I'm talking about the disappearances of the Star Tiger in 1948 and the Star Ariel just a year later. Both British passenger planes vanished without a trace.
Yeah, these cases are interesting. They involve seemingly well-maintained aircraft, experienced crews, and in the case of the Star Ariel, decent weather conditions. No distress calls, no wreckage ever found, just silence.
Easy to see why those disappearances would add to the Bermuda Triangle legend.
Definitely. But even with these cases, we can't rule out natural causes. For example, the Star Tiger had a type of heater that was known to be, well, not very reliable. Some pilots who flew those planes have said a malfunctioning heater could potentially start a fire or even cause an explosion, which could explain why there was no distress call.
So even with limited evidence, there are still explanations within the realm of possibility. But there's one more case from your sources that I think we should look at. The Carol A. Deering, a 5-masted schooner found completely abandoned and run aground in 1921. It's got all the elements of a classic ghost ship story, doesn't it?
Oh, the Deering. Now that's a fascinating case. No crew, missing logbook, lifeboat's gone, anchor's missing. And there were signs of deliberate damage on board. It's like you stepped into a maritime mystery novel.
It really does. And our sources, they add even more mystery. With these eyewitness accounts of the Deering, just days before it was found. A nearby lightship, they reported seeing the schooner. And the guy at the helm, he told them they'd lost their anchors. But here's the strange thing. Witnesses said he was a red-headed guy with a Scandinavian accent. Definitely not the captain.
Yeah, that's a big red flag right there.
Yeah.
And get this, there were also reports of this mysterious black steamship following the Deering around the same time, and they said its name was intentionally hidden, like obscured. Sounds like something straight out of a pirate movie, right?
Yeah, it does. And speaking of pirates, there was even that message in a bottle, claiming the crew had been kidnapped by, you guessed it, pirates. Turns out it was a hoax. But it makes you wonder, right? Was it inspired by something that actually happened on board?
That's a good point. There are so many unanswered questions about the Deering. But one theory that keeps coming up in our research is mutiny. Apparently there was a lot of tension between the captain and the crew, even some threats of mutiny before they even left port.
Okay, so we had this abandoned ship, strange circumstances, missing crew, signs of a struggle, and then these rumors of a mutiny. The Carol A. Deering might be the closest we get to a real-life ghost ship. But let's shift gears a bit here. If the Bermuda Triangle was really as dangerous as everyone says, wouldn't there be some kind of, I don't know, official warning?
You'd think, right. I mean, think about it. We have warning signs for all sorts of hazards. Wet floors, steep cliffs, areas with strong currents. But for this infamous triangle that supposedly swallows ships and planes whole, nothing.
It's true. You'd think at least the Coast Guard would issue some kind of advisory. Especially for a shipping route that's so busy.
And here's another thing. The Bermuda Triangle isn't even on nautical charts. It's not officially recognized as a danger zone, which, begs the question, if it's such a hazard, why isn't it clearly marked?
Yeah, like, if you need a sign for a slippery floor, shouldn't there be a giant neon sign flashing, "Danger, Bermuda Triangle"?
Exactly. The lack of any official recognition really makes you question the whole idea. But as you can imagine, people who believe in the myth, they've come up with ways to explain this away.
Oh, really? How do they justify the lack of warnings then?
Well, they often use this term, adjacent regions. Basically, if something disappears near but not inside the traditional boundaries of the triangle, they say it's still the triangle's fault.
Adjacent regions. So even if a ship sinks hundreds of miles away, it could still be blamed on the triangle.
That's basically the idea, but then it raises more questions, right? Like, how adjacent does something have to be? Is the entire Atlantic Ocean an adjacent region?
It just seems like a way to kind of stretch the boundaries of the myth, to fit whatever story they're trying to tell. So maybe the real mystery isn't the Bermuda Triangle itself, but why people are so attached to this idea of some supernatural force
I think you're right. We have centuries of disappearances blamed on the Bermuda Triangle. Ships, planes, even submarines. But when you look at the evidence, there's rarely any pattern. No single thing that connects them all. Maybe we're trying to force a connection where there isn't one.
Right, the ocean is vast and powerful and unpredictable. You have storms, rogue waves, mechanical failures, navigation errors, all very real dangers for sailors and pilots.
And the Bermuda Triangle is in a particularly active region. It's in the path of hurricanes, and as the Gulf Stream running through it, that's a powerful current that can move debris really fast. And it makes search and rescue really tough. Plus, it's one of the most heavily trafficked shipping lanes in the world. So all of these factors combined, they naturally increase the likelihood of incidents.
So basically, more traffic plus more hazards equals more disappearances. But that's not as exciting as a supernatural force swallowing ships whole, right?
Yeah, there's definitely something alluring about the unknown. Those mysteries that we can't easily explain. But if we're being logical, the Bermuda Triangle seems less like a paranormal hotspot and more like a place where natural factors create the perfect conditions for accidents.
But what about those cases that are still unexplained? The ones where the weather was good, the crew was experienced, and the ship just vanished, leaving no clues behind.
Those are the cases that keep the legend going. But even without definitive answers, doesn't it make more sense to consider other possibilities? Like the vastness of the ocean, the limits of our technology, the chance that some events, however tragic, just might stay unexplained.
It's humbling, isn't it? To realize that even with all our advancements, there are still mysteries we can't solve.
The ocean is powerful, and it still holds many secrets. Maybe the Bermuda Triangle isn't really about a specific location, but about our fascination with the mysteries of the ocean itself.
Yeah, it's like they say, right? We know more about the surface of the moon than we do about our own oceans.
Exactly, and sometimes the ocean just doesn't want to give up its secrets. But maybe that's part of what makes it so fascinating, you know?
Right.
The Bermuda Triangle, it's become this modern myth. It plays on that primal fear of the unknown, those forces we can't control.
It's a reminder that even with all our fancy technology, we're still pretty vulnerable to nature's power.
And even when we can explain most of those disappearances logically, there's still that little voice in the back of your head whispering,
Yeah, well, yes.
what if there's something more to it, something we don't understand yet?
Right, exactly.
That's what makes a good mystery so good. It lets us think about the unknown, all the possibilities.
So after looking at all this research, all these sources, where do we land on the Bermuda Triangle then?
Well, the evidence really points to natural causes for most of the disappearances. Storms, navigation errors, equipment failures, that sort of thing. But we humans, we like explanations, and sometimes the simplest answer just isn't as satisfying, you know?
I get that. Maybe the real lesson here is that we should be more in awe of the world. All the mysteries that are still out there, waiting to be discovered.
Yeah, maybe the Bermuda Triangle, for all the hype and speculation, it brings us back to the power of nature, how fragile life is, and that enduring fascination with things we can't explain.
So what do you think? Are you on board with the natural explanations? Or is there a part of you that still wonders about what secrets are hidden down there? Maybe the real challenge isn't solving the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle, but learning to live with the unknown, accepting that some questions might not have easy answers, and that's okay, you know? Sometimes the most interesting mysteries are the ones that stick with us, the ones that make us keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep searching for the truth, no matter where it leads us.